Hello, my name is Wendy Myers. Welcome to the Live to 110 podcast. You can find me on my website, live to110.com, or on my YouTube channel, Wendy Live to 110. Please go there and subscribe. Today we have my friend Emily McGuire on the podcast. I met her on Jimmy Moore's Livin, Vida low-carb cruise last year, and we had a really nice time. She's such a nice person, just very, very funny and sweet, and I wanted to have her on the podcast to talk about a lot of interesting things that she's doing. She has been traveling around the world talking to all the experts on the low-carb diet and the different diseases that it's helping, and really honing in on the cutting-edge research on ketogenic diet. So we're going to talk about that today on the podcast. Please keep in mind that this podcast is only informational in nature and is not a substitute for professional medical advice. So please keep in mind this is for entertainment purposes only. Please consult your healthcare practitioner before engaging in any treatment that we suggest today on the show. And I'm so excited. My first supplement is coming out, Bio Rehab. It's my first line of supplements, and the very flagship brand is coming out. It's called Liver Rehab Plus. That'll be on Amazon, hopefully by the time this podcast airs, but it'll be on, in about 2 weeks, it'll be on Amazon for sale. And I spent many months designing the formula for this product, and this has been a dream of mine in the works for many years, so it's finally coming to fruition. So keep an eye out for Bio Rehab supplements on Amazon. Our guest today, Emily McGuire, she completed her BSc Nutrition, and she went on to study for her master's in Obesity Science and Management. She is the author at low-carb-genesis.com, her website, and she's keen to share the myths and truths surrounding the ever-confusing and interesting topic of nutrition. So am I. And with over 7 years of experience working within the commercial weight loss sector, she has unprecedented insight into the use of alternative nutritional therapies, particularly the ketogenic diet. For the past year, she's been touring around the world in order to get first-hand insight into what is really going on in the world of keto nutrition. Emily, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too. I met you on the low-carb cruise, and that was you were a fellow presenter there, and we were on Jimmy Moore's low-carb cruise in 2014. And it was nice to have pina coladas with you and get to know you a little bit on the cruise.
Yeah, it's always a funny one, the cruise. It's mixing vacation with doing a bit of, speaking. So I think it's nice. I think people see that, we can also have a bit of a vacation as well.
Yes.
And have an odd pina colada is okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's fun. I went on this year's one as well. So that was interesting. Another good lineup of speakers. So yeah.
Yeah, and so what did you present about on the cruise?
I presented about the trip that I'm doing at the minute. So I know we were just kind of speaking a little bit about that off air. So I've been traveling now for, must be about 6 months, I think it is. And I've been doing this crazy round the world trip of sort of meeting everyone in the low carb, ketogenic, nutrition world. So I started off in South Africa and went from there to Australia to America, and now I'm in my last stop, which is Canada, before I head home. So yes, I was presenting on that, kind of what I've seen as I've gone around, what's been going on from all the different countries, and just a general overview of how I've been doing it, basically. So
you're just on like the low carb odyssey.
I know, it's quite funny, I think, because I'm doing it on my own as well. So it's this crazy person with a very even more crazy accent that's turning up to these people's offices and universities and all these kind of things. So it's been really interesting, but I'm kind of getting a bit sick and fed up of living out of the suitcase.
Yeah.
So you take for granted the little things in life, but it's been amazing so far. So.
And so what is your goal with your ketogenic odyssey that you're taking?
So professionally, I'm looking to go back and do my PhD. That's kind of the overall, kind of the ultimate goal, if you like. And I want to go back and specifically look at ketogenic nutrition. So as you probably know as well, there's not that many people that are not only researching it, but using it around the world. and particularly in the UK as well. So I decided to set off on this trip and do a little bit of travel, mixed with a little bit of sort of professional aspect with it as well, and head back. And there's a few options that I've got to sort of consider, but I'm gonna head back home before I definitely pick which place I'm gonna end up in, I think.
Nice. What are your top places that you think you want to study?
Oh, I don't know if I can say
No.
just now. There's definitely a few in Australia and the States as well. But there's another couple perhaps back actually in London. So kind of whilst I've been away in this year, there's more people picking it up over there as well, which is quite exciting and interesting. So I'm going to go back to the UK and see what's happening there.
Did you visit Christine Cronell when you were there?
I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't make it up the East Coast up as far. I got up as far as Sydney. So I started off in the West Coast. So I started off in Perth, then travelled down to Adelaide. I met the people there at the Cereal Centre. So that's Manny Noakes and Grant Brinkworth. So they've done quite a bit of research in low carb, and particularly diabetics. And then I moved on from there to Canberra. There I met the amazing, I don't know if you know the Merrymaker sisters.
No.
That are in Australia. Oh, Emma and Carla Papas is their surname, but the Merrymaker sisters are just the most infectious two people. Just amazing. So they're based in Australia and doing really great things out of there. The likes of Chef Pete Evans as well. I don't know if you've come across Pete at all. From there I went to Melbourne and hung out with the Low Carb Down Under group. So that's people like Dr. Rod Taylor, there's Dr. Gary Fetke, there's a whole bunch of them within there. And then up to Sydney. So that's where I went to meet with Dr. Kieran Rooney. So he is a professor at Sydney University that's actually starting to do a lot of work looking at low carb diets, particularly looking at sugar sweetened beverages, and he's started to hopefully look at the ketogenic aspect with cancer as well. And then from there I actually had to get over to the States to make it to PaleoFX. So that kind of cut my Australia part a little bit shorter, so I couldn't make it any further up the East Coast unfortunately. But Gold Coast, Brisbane, it's actually probably one of the nicest parts of Australia, so just means I have to go back, I think.
Yeah, I went there for 2 months when I was younger, and it was beautiful. Did some scuba diving, but no, I was not visiting any low carbers. But
no nutrition in there.
I was probably eating carbs and scuba diving. I did the exact opposite of what you were doing. But yeah, I really like Christine Cronell. She was on the podcast a while ago.
She's lovely. Yeah, Christine's lovely. I saw her when I was in South Africa. So she was at the first international low carb conference that was held in South Africa. So there was a host of pretty much names that a lot of you will know. So obviously Jimmy Moore was there. We had Dr. Eric Westman, Steve Finney. We had Asim Malhotra from the UK. Darrell Edwards was there, and Christine was there from Australia. There was quite a few of them from Australia actually. So I got to see her there.
She was a fellow presenter on the Low Carb Cruise in 2014. It
was
very odd because we look exactly alike. She's my doppelganger from down under.
Oh my god, she's doing actually. I think she won the crown of traveling the furthest that year as well. So that was pretty after experiencing the jet lag from Sydney to LA as well, and then flying straight to Austin. It is the worst jet lag I have ever experienced. And the only thing I can say is thank goodness for PaleoFX, because Rob Wolf and Dr. Parsley, I can't remember his first name off the top of my head, they have that new sleep cocktail that they've just brought out. And they gave it to me to try kind of the first night, and it was the best thing that I had ever tried with regards to sleep. So I cannot highly recommend that enough if anyone's suffering from really severe jet lag, because I was a walking zombie for about 4 days.
Oh no.
So,
well, that was nice of Rob to knock you out at PaleoFX.
Oh, you put it that. I felt though I was kept trying to go past and get more. I was like, I need to have more of this. So, but yeah, it's highly recommended. I tried that before I had tried some of Dave Asprey's stuff as well. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So what got you so passionate about the ketogenic or low carb diets?
Yeah, so it kind of started actually when I was in my undergrad for my degree. My degree was kind of the conventional, the way I was taught was the low fat, the eat well plate, as we call it in the UK. And when I got to my second year of my undergrad, I took a placement over the summer to help a commercial weight loss company. And being probably the typical student, I didn't do much of my due diligence behind the company, turned up on the first day, and that's when I realized they were a low carb company. I pretty much almost never went back, or I didn't think I was going to go back after the first day, because I actually thought I was going to have to report them or something, because, to me, is what I've been taught was it's all about low fat, and we got taught one biochem class that basically ketosis is bad for you and it gives you bad breath, so don't do it. So I sat down on the first day, and it was actually Dr. Eric Westman and Dr. Will Yancey's work from Duke University that I started reading. And it was literally, the way I've explained it to people on this trip as well, it's almost like going down the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland. You just start unraveling all this stuff that you've just, never even heard of, and there's just no way back, basically. So that was kind of almost the start of it. From there, I also had to finish my degree, and what was interesting was I had to obviously I had to do what my lecturers and things wanted me to write about to pass the exams, but at the same time I was obviously learning and reading all the science that was kind of contradictory. So it was quite an interesting way. I know a lot of people find out about it after they finish their degree. And then from there, I went on to do my master's degree in obesity science. And luckily, that university was really quite open to sort of looking outside the box for dietary approaches. They actually quite encouraged it. So my master's thesis then was looking at low carbohydrate diets in diabetics, type 2s in particular. So it's kind of all just sort of come from there. And then the first time I ever saw or really went to a specific ketogenic conference, if you like, was in 2011 at the American Society of Bariatric Physicians. And it was part of the Nutrition Metabolism Society. And they had a conference pretty much all on ketone bodies. And it was the likes of Eric Kossoff from the Johns Hopkins Center. There was Tom Seyfried. There was Richard Feynman, Jeff Bolick. And I was, a very naive 22-year-old turn up to this conference, and I thought I knew some stuff, and the level of knowledge, biochemistry was just really, really just is what enticed me. Science is kind of always what's driven me, and the academic side of it. So from there, I was just completely hooked. Yeah. So long story short of it, and then from there, it's just how it's all panned out. So.
Yeah, you're going to get the transcriptionist to run for her money with all the different names and everything.
I know.
Yeah. So what are some of the many benefits of, adopting a ketogenic diet or a low-carb, high-fat diet?
Yeah, there's many. The first thing I'll say with it as well is, although there is a lot of benefits out there with regards to the ketogenic, I mean, I'm probably going to be a little controversial maybe when I say this as well, but it's not necessarily the be-all and end-all of dietary approaches. It's one aspect. It's a dietary approach. For some people, it might not be the way to go for them. But for people that I've worked with, that I've now seen in so many other clinics from around the world, some of the benefits that you can actually experience are really profound. Weight loss is obviously one of them, and that's kind of the sort of the standard that everyone I think is sort of going to ketogenic for. But as the more research that comes out now, we're now finding benefits ranging from improvements in diabetes right down to treatments with regards to cancer. So there's this what you call sort of this therapeutics or clinical aspects with regards to ketogenic. So ranging from epilepsy right through to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's and cancer as well. So that side of it is really exciting. Mm-hmm. Other people, and particularly on the other side, which is quite sort of groundbreaking, is the performance and the athletic side. So particularly for endurance runners or any kind of endurance sport, basically, they're now finding that ketogenic diet. So if you're in this what's known as fat adapted state, so if you're basically allowing your body to switch from burning glucose predominantly to burning fat, then you can have so much better performance. And that's been seen in some really elite performers right down to people who just do recreational, Ironmans or marathons, etc. There was also a really good documentary film that was out. I don't know if you've heard of serial killers, and that serial is in the cereal that you eat.
Oh yeah, we watched that. We watched the pre-dinner for the
yeah,
low-carb
well, they've
cruise.
now
It was
brought
really
out a
good.
second one. Yeah, and it's called Run on Fat. And the second one is basically based on this couple who decided to row from, now, my geography is terrible, I've travelled the world, but they decided to row from, I think it was the west coast over to Hawaii, I think it was, which took them, it's taken them around about 30 days, and basically they wanted to do it under a ketogenic diet. So they wanted to do it completely fat adapted. Now obviously all the conventional people were like, you're crazy, there's absolutely no way you can do this without being, carb loaded effectively. But they went about it, and there's this whole documentary based on it, and they basically obviously do it completely fat adapted. So there's a lot more of this coming out, and some really exciting research around it as well. And I think a lot more kind of athletes and things are going to be adopting that approach, because not only is it good for the performance, but it's also really good for the recovery and what seems to help with injury time as well. And then in terms of the other aspect, is a lot of people, when they start ketogenic diet, they report a lot better with regards to mental cognition. They have a lot more clarity. People notice a lot more improvements with regards to skin, etc. So there is a whole host of a lot of what we call, I suppose, anecdotal evidence. So people, on N=1 kind of case reports. So there's still a lot that needs to be studied, and that's why I'm quite careful. I think a lot of people can think that, and as the more interest is generated with regards to ketogenic as well, I think we need to be careful that it's not going to run away as this amazing cure for everything. Whilst I think it does have a place, I think there's obviously lots of other aspects that will come into it, and it's, a lifestyle, it's the way, people sleep, people's hormones, toxins, etc. All these kind of things as well will come into play. So
This might be a dumb question, but just for any listeners that don't know, what does a ketogenic diet look like?
So a ketogenic diet, generally under sort of the broad terms, if you like, the carbohydrate content of a ketogenic diet needs to be at 50 grams of carbs per day or less. Now that's the kind of sort of upper level, if you like, that we would say. For a lot of people who are more insulin resistant, so that's people with diabetes, metabolic syndrome, anything like fatty liver, or people that are predominantly hold their fat around their tummy area, they might do a lot better with a carbohydrate content at around about 20 to 30 grams. On the other end of the scope, it is obviously a lot higher in fat than what a lot of people are used to. Again, the exact level of fat content will be very individualized, and it's also very dependent on why you're following the ketogenic diet. So for someone who is epileptic, or perhaps following it for other therapeutic reasons like Alzheimer's disease or for cancer, their fat level can go up to as high as even 90% of your total calorie intake sometimes. For other individuals, it can be as low as 65%. So again, there's a lot of these different sort of percentages and things that are online. I find it quite hard sometimes. I don't necessarily like working with the percentages because it just gives you this vague sort of overview. It's obviously very dependent on the amount of calories that you're going to need as well. So for example, an endurance athlete is going to need a lot more calories than someone who's obese and looking to lose weight, for example. So their percentages might look the same, but the absolute overall amount that they take in is very different. And then the other factor is the protein. So a lot of people, when they say, you hear low carb, you automatically think that it's this high protein aspect. And that's a kind of a myth. I suppose maybe way back, sort of 10, 20 years ago, we maybe did still overeat a little bit on protein, particularly with regards to ketogenic programs. But obviously, protein in itself is very gluconeogenic. So that basically means that your body can take the protein and synthesize it into glucose if it needs to. Now, that's not to say that, the smallest amount. I think on the other end of the scale, and again, this is where we've got to be a bit careful, is that you don't want to undereat on protein as well. Protein is still really vital to our overall health, our bodily functions, it's what everything grows on, basically. So it's basically what we call moderate protein. And again, that'd be very dependent on the individual. It's very dependent on your body weight, your muscle mass, and that's how obviously it will vary. Generally, again, if you're doing it for therapeutic reasons, so for example, epilepsy, and particularly in children who are really ill with epilepsy, they might have a lot lower level than, a marathon runner, for example. The overall diet, the way that it looks, is probably similar to how a lot of people maybe eat. So morning time, for example, it could be a couple of eggs with some bacon, maybe a little bit of avocado if you can tolerate a little bit more carbohydrate content. Your lunchtime could just be a salad with some protein option with something like olive oil on top to get your fat source in there. And then evening meal again, just any sort of protein with a vegetable source with either cooked in some kind of fat or obviously topped off with some fat as well. Quite a lot of people, when you get very ketogenic, the ketone bodies themselves are very satiated. Well, sorry, not the ketone bodies themselves are satiating, but the ketone bodies can downplay your appetite basically. So what a lot of people do when they follow a ketogenic diet is quite often they'll have a meal in the morning or, sort of later morning time, and they can go completely fine. They're quite full throughout the day until evening time, and they'll have an evening meal. So again, it's sometimes getting out of this conventional thinking of, we have to eat 3 meals a day with these 2 snacks, and that's how a lot of people think you have to eat. But when you go ketogenic, a lot of the time your body just, the way it responds changes. So I know a lot of people that will just eat twice a day with maybe a bit of a snack in between, and that's completely fine for their body. So again, it's just about having this individualized approach with it. For some people, they need the 3 meals a day. They just could not skip breakfast, they could not skip lunch, and they could not skip dinner. So it's really just about adjusting it to that individual basically.
Yeah, I like that you talk about individualization because I agree that the ketogenic diet doesn't work for everybody, and everyone's a little bit different. And for me, I played around with it in the past. One of the very first diets that I tried was the Atkins diet, written by Dr. Eric Westman. And I also, have recently been playing around more with it, a low-carb diet, and just because I'm trying to lose weight and just doing a little experiment and whatnot. And I find I can only eat twice a day. I'm just not hungry. For because of the ketones and whatnot, and I feel really good. I wasn't able to do it a few years ago, as I talked about jokingly on the cruise. I used to make everybody hate me, but now I've been playing around more with it, and it feels really good.
Good.
Yeah, but I like that you talk about how when you eat too much protein, that can turn into sugar. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they can't just freely eat carbs or protein or any macronutrient and not suffer the consequences.
Yeah, and I think as more sort of research that's coming out on it, I even remember when I first started, sort of researching into low carb way back, when there wasn't as much emphasis on the protein even then. So we knew that kind of with the protein is sort of what we say is that the protein almost takes care of itself to a certain extent, because protein in itself as a macronutrient is very satiating as well. So just of the nature of the way that the body metabolizes protein, and obviously it's no storage capacity for protein like it does for fat and carbs, then your body has this natural ability to, as soon as you eat a really big steak, there's just no way you could eat any more of that. It's very different to when you eat fat and carbohydrates. So there is that kind of mechanism, but obviously in an obese individual where their, epistat, hypothalamus, etc. is, effectively kind of damaged, if they're metabolically damaged, then they don't necessarily have these sort of signals and cues with regards to fullness after meals, and obviously a lot of hormones that come into play there as well. So I think that the aspect with the protein is that some people could actually overeat on it, and I even found that we had some individuals where they weren't losing weight or they weren't getting the improvements, particularly in blood sugar levels as well. And what we were finding is that they were not only having their 3 meals a day, but then they were having unlimited amounts kind of protein snacks. And that's sort of where the stumbling block for it was. And that is, as I say, just because of the body's ability to turn that protein into sugar effectively. And the body obviously uses that in place of the ketone bodies. Yeah. So it can be a bit of a minefield in the beginning. And, once you kind of get it, then and you can start listening to your body. But in the beginning, it does take a little bit of sort of trial and error.
Yeah, and you said that, a lot of people are attracted to the ketogenic diet or, high carb, low carb, high fat diets because they're trying to lose weight. And so do high ketones automatically translate into weight loss?
They don't. And this is something that I find a lot of time, particularly with the clients that I've had as well. And so a lot of people think that, the greater the blood meter reading that they get, or obviously the new breath meters that is out now, so the greater, if it blows red, then that must mean that you are, highly into ketosis. But then I get people saying, but I'm not losing weight. So the way that it was kind of explained to me, and this has been by some of the doctors and people that have worked in this for 20, 30 years, is that there's a huge difference between fat burning and weight loss. So when you're fat burning, so if you take a blood measurement of the beta hydroxybutyrate, or you blow in, or you pee in a stick, or whatever which way you want to measure, that doesn't necessarily correlate completely with regards to weight loss. And that is more to do particularly with the diet that you're eating as well. So quite often you'll hear that people say, the calories don't matter. Listen, there's this big debate with regards to the calories in equals calories out. And whilst I'm not saying that is, it's not just about the calories in equals calories out, it is to do with the quality of obviously the calories that you're eating. But if you're eating in an excess of, 3,000, 4,000, some people even 5,000 calories and expect to lose weight, and you're someone who is particularly obese, then that is not going to happen, and a lot of people are trying now for obviously to consume your fats in liquid form, and where it's coconut oil or butter, etc., in your coffee or tea or whatever along those lines. If you do that quite consistently throughout the day, then what your body is going to be doing is it's going to be taking the fat from the food that you're eating and burning that and producing ketone bodies. So just because you have a high ketone level, doesn't necessarily differentiate between if your body's got that from its body fat, or if it's got it from the food that you've just ingested. So a lot of people are saying, when clients and things that have come to me before, they're stumbling or they're plateauing, and a lot of the time it is just a little bit because their calorie content is still a little bit too high. Now again, I think a lot of people, when they hear that, they think, oh, but this isn't to do with calories and that kind of thing. It's not within that certain sense, but calories do have to come into play. And from everyone that I've chatted from around the world and all the major people within this, they all say the same. You can't sort of get away from that factor. But the major thing, and what the plus is with regards to the ketogenic, is that you can lower the calorie content ever so slightly even, and you don't have that hunger that happens when you do a standard 500 calorie deficit diet, for example. You don't have those sugar cravings. You do feel full, so you can do it just by taking a little bit of butter out, or taking a little bit of coconut oil, or whatever it is that you might be adding in that's just tipping that calorie content up ever so slightly. And again, it's still about not putting people on a really low calorie diet at all, and it's not about focusing on that. But for individuals, particularly as you get further down the journey, so when you start off with the ketogenic, it's not necessarily that you have to really focus on the calorie count. But as you get further down the line, and if you're plateauing and you're not losing weight in particular, then you would really need to take a look at that. So yes, there's a huge difference between fat burning and weight loss, and there's a huge difference between your ketone body levels are high because of the food that you're eating, or is it because of your body's basically burning its own fat.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we definitely want to be burning fat. I know I do.
Yes. I mean, people who are athletes and things, they can ingest a lot more fat, and they are obviously going to burn that throughout their marathons or whatever they're doing. But so again, this is why it has to be really individualized, and you've got to be really careful about the broadness that's kind of now out there and sort of the the World Wide Web, etc.
Yeah, and podcasters, a little lower fat for sure. Sitting around a lot. Yeah, so,
a little bit.
So let's talk a little bit about the low carb flu, so to speak. That when people are transitioning from moderate or high carb typical American diet to a low carb diet, like what kind of things happen and what can people expect?
So when you're transitioning, as you said, there's this kind of standard what's known as the low carb flu or the Atkins flu, sometimes it's called. So within the first sort of 2 to 3 days, some people can notice symptoms like headaches, lethargy, they get a metallic taste in the mouth, they can have weak legs, just generally, that's why it's kind of called the sort of low carb fluke. You just don't really feel that right. Now, a lot of people get a bit put off by that and they think it sounds really scary, but the reason why it's happening is, first of all, your body's getting used to the switch over an energy source. So it's getting used to using the ketone bodies over the glucose for energy. And second of all, a lot of the reason it's happening is because of a shift in electrolyte balance. So when you go on a low carbohydrate diet, obviously your body does dump out a lot of water, which is very well known in the first couple of weeks. And with that water, obviously there is then fluctuations with regards to sodium, potassium and magnesium as well. So really, to overcome that sort of the first week with regards to the keto flu, just taking a supplement, making sure you're having extra salt on your food will obviously make sure you replenish any of that's lost, and then taking a magnesium supplement as well is really beneficial for that aspect. It shouldn't last any longer than around about a week. Some people don't even experience any symptoms. Again, it's really individualized, and that's not to say that your body's not burning fat, it's just that your body's been a bit more efficient than some other individuals. Particularly what your diet was like before as well. I mean, if your diet was quite a sort of clean sort of diet before, then it's going to be, not as kind of bad when you're sort of going into that keto aspect. But having that added salt and with regards to magnesium as well can really, really help those side effects with it. And like I said, shouldn't last any longer than about a week.
Yeah, when I tried the low-carb diet before, many, many years ago, when I first was experimenting with different diets, I found the willpower really hard to resist the sugars and things like that, because my brain was wanting to make serotonin with this carbohydrates. But I think now that I've healed my health, my adrenals, et cetera, as many of the listeners know, and I've balanced my neurotransmitters, I'm not I don't crave sugar at all, and I'm able to do the ketogenic diet, or attempt to do it much more effectively, because I don't have this white knuckle craving for sugar because I have adequate serotonin levels.
Yeah. I mean, initially when people start, and particularly people who are very sort of sugar and carb addicted, and what we know is with regards to sugar now is sugar is so addictive, and it's really, it's in the media just now. It's a really hot topic with regards to sugar. That Sugar film was another film, documentary that's just coming out from Australia, so that's one I can completely highly recommend for people to see. And it's all this aspect about how people who have sugar day in, day out, they don't actually realise kind of how sort of addicted in things you are to until you have to come off it. And that's when you suddenly realise that this is, your whole hypothalamus, the whole chemicals, etc., transitioning within the brain is just so messed up, and particularly for individuals who are overweight and who are obese, it's even, harder to make obviously those switches. And within our food, within the food supply, I mean, they employ scientists specifically to get a formula for sugar, fat and salt within certain foods, so that it completely messes up your brain, the neurotransmitters that are going on within there, within the hypothalamus and the apostat. It completely messes it up, and that's why you can sit and eat a whole bag of chips and kind of not really think you're feeling full, because the scientists out there know how to put that together in such a way. So when you do first go keto or low carb, then it can be a little bit difficult in the beginning. Using things like natural sweeteners where possible, like stevia, I really do recommend for my clients who are really struggling, because I'd rather have that as a crutch and as a sort of transition tool for them, so that once they really get into that, it's a huge change for a lot of people, just cutting out the sugar and refined carbohydrates, and that's been your diet for so long. So transitioning, and then once you're feeling that you kind of got this, as you say, and maybe a little bit more sort of willpower, then trying to obviously pull back with regards to even the natural sweeteners. I'm not a huge fan of people kind of being too reliant on them, because I still think it doesn't really allow your body to get away from this kind of reliance on sugar, the sweetness, because when the sweetness even of a natural sweetener hits the tongue, the body doesn't differentiate between if that's sugar or stevia, for example. it hits the tongue and it signals to the brain that this is sweet. So, there's lots of different studies now coming through, and it's probably a very sort of area that you could be on sort of either side, but I'm just a huge fan of where if you can get away from that kind of sweetness, the better.
Yeah.
But there is, and again, the other aspect, once you kind of get past that sort of initial stages with the ketogenic, is that you don't have these hungers and you don't have these cravings. There's been a few sort of studies looking at, particularly with regards to the ketone bodies, and there's a specific hunger hormone called ghrelin, and what they find is that when individuals have a high level of ketone bodies circulating in their blood, the ghrelin level is actually suppressed, and that's actually one of the hormones that signals to your body to say that you're hungry. So there's all these things and an aspect with regards to ketone bodies that are coming out now to show that it might help almost kind of trick the body, if you like, and it'll help you get over that stage of having these sugar cravings and these aspects with regards to wanting these types of foods as well.
And so I'm personally, I'm amazed at how little food I need. I used to have to eat 3 meals a day, and I just didn't feel right. And now I'm eating 2 small meals a day, and I'm just kind of really blown away by how little food I can function on.
Yeah, I know.
Fat. So let's talk about some of the types of research on ketogenic diets that you're uncovering around the world.
Yeah. Probably a lot of the place, it's mostly been in the States where some of the really exciting work is going on. So a few of the places that I visited, so there is a doctor who's based in Phoenix, and her name is Dr. Adrienne Scheck. Really, really lovely. So much great work that she's got going on. She's at the Barrow Institute, and a lot of her work is looking at brain cancer. And what's really interesting about her work is she is actually looking at the aspect of the ketogenic diet, but using it with standard care. So this is another aspect that I think, again, we've got to be a little bit careful of at the minute, is a lot of people out there are maybe thinking that, the ketogenic diet is the thing that's going to cure cancer, and I personally haven't seen enough evidence to say that we can completely say that is, 100% true. I think there's a lot of evidence now to say, one, that's very good as an adjunct to the standard of care that we're using, and I think for some people it's definitely been their lifeline, for obviously some of the procedures that they've gone through. There hasn't been, a lot of the evidence that's going on just now is within animals and cell cultures, so obviously we still need a lot more human trials, and that is what they're going to start looking at this centre in Phoenix. There is a lot more human trials that are going to be coming out from there now, which is really interesting and really quite exciting. It is obviously predominantly in brain cancer, so again, from there you can't translate it to all the different types of cancers, but what they are going to be looking at next is they're going to be looking at brain cancer with metastases, particularly with breast cancer. So it is really growing and evolving. What's quite interesting is what I spoke to Adrienne about was kind of the funding aspect, and obviously how that's kind of being received at sort of different levels. So a lot of really interesting work, and what was really interesting about her as well when we're speaking about the ketogenic diet is, as a scientist and a researcher, you're purposely trying to go out to prove yourself wrong, because you can't go into study having a bias, but that's not always the case. So generally you're meant to obviously go in and prove kind of a null hypothesis and try and sort of prove that wrong there. And one thing that Dr. Scheck was saying was that she can't really believe, if you think something's too good to be true, generally it often is, particularly in science. But what she has been finding is that these ketone bodies just seem to have so much of a positive impact, if you can put it that way, particularly with regards to the downplaying of cancer pathways, that it just seems to, it's really quite exciting, obviously in the aspect, if you can put this with, particularly alongside an adjunct with regards to the standard of care. One of the questions that I had asked her was, if you put this with regards to standard of care, does it help in terms of downplay even the side effects with regards to radiotherapy and chemotherapy? Because the problems with that is that not only are you trying to, effectively kill the cancer cells, but normal function cells can also obviously die off, and that's why you get a lot of the side effects, with cancer. And again, she doesn't have the full sort of side of research, but again, anecdotally, she's found that people who have been following a ketogenic diet seem to not have as many side effects. Now again, that's very much, you can't go out there and say that this is the be all and end all, but anecdotally is what we're seeing. And the major thing with the ketogenic diet as well, particularly on the side of cancer, is it doesn't seem to do any harm. So by someone going on the ketogenic diet, yes, it can be a little bit difficult to follow. There are particularly people who are going through chemo or radiotherapy, they can have change in palate, so they might not be able to tolerate meat, for example. So there's all these different aspects. So if you are going to go on it, you really need to work with someone who's trained properly in the ketogenic diet, get advice, get help from that kind of side of it. But it does seem to be really promising. And then there's obviously Dominic D'Agostino, who's at the University of South Florida, who's doing a whole host of really, really amazing and interesting work that's coming out of there. And also Thomas Seyfried, who is in Boston. And Thomas Seyfried, he's kind of he's sort of the major person that's taken the metabolic theory of cancer forward. And sort of from there, that's where kind of other people have sort of sprung from. And he is a really interesting character to visit in his lab. And in his lab, he teams up ketogenic diet more with this kind of fasting approach with it. So he actually thinks that it's more to do with the calorie restriction rather than just purely the carb restriction. That's why it's working within sort of cancer cells. And in his lab, he actually has pretty much all of his students and everybody that works there, they have like these competitions with regards. So when I turned up, they had all just started a 3-day fast. And they'll all take their blood sugar levels and their ketone levels, and it's like a contest to see who can get the lowest on blood sugar and then the highest on their ketone level. Because what he is doing there, and there's a newspaper that's just come out from him, is he is looking at what's known as this kind of index. So the other thing that we don't know is we don't know, for example, someone had cancer, we don't know what level of ketone bodies they should get to. Just like we don't know, should their blood sugar level be as low as possible? A lot of this is still really, really unknown. What he's found is this kind of index, if you like. So for an individual, you basically want, it's a calculation which is based in this paper, which I can give you the link to, that basically shows that kind of the lower that your blood sugar level and the higher your ketone body level for that individual seems to be the therapeutic kind of window. But again, this is very sort of new research. It needs to be piloted. It needs to be done in more adults. But it's just really kind of sort of interesting work that's coming from there. And they've done sort of a lot of their own kind of experiments on themselves and such, and found things like caffeine, for example, the impact that has on ketone body levels, and they found that it can actually lower ketone body levers. Certain types of alcohol as well.
So I'm lowering my ketones.
You were lowering it a little bit with it. Apparently the more expensive wine you buy, the less impact that has on ketone body levels.
Oh, right here again.
So that's obviously advocating.
When I drink, I don't drink very often, but when I do, when I imbibe, I do it right.
Well, obviously, and red wine as well. And lastly, probably the most one of the most exciting was I went to see Professor Jake Wilson and Ryan Lowry, and they're at the University of Tampa. And they have worked quite closely with Dom D'Agostino and also Dr. Jeff Volek as well, who's at Ohio, who I also went to see. And between all three of them, they're doing a lot of work with regards to performance. And I know that Jake and Ryan, I think hopefully there might be a study coming out soon that's looking at ketogenic, particularly with regards to power athletes, which there's not a lot of evidence in that at all. So, a lot of people think that you can't get muscle gains when you're ketogenic, or you can't have the strength or the power, etc. But there's a lot of work now coming out from Jake and Ryan's lab. So I think for anybody interested in performance, to really keep an eye on those two and what they're doing. Their work is really amazing. They're like my go-to people for the performance aspect. And Dr. Jeff Volek as well. I went to see his lab at Ohio, and it's just phenomenal. He's just finished the FASTER study, which again was looking at elite athletes, and I know Ben Greenfield was one of the participants in that study. So again, he's got a lot of amazing evidence out of there. It's not kind of been published yet, so I'm not sure if I'm kind of allowed to divulge what was sort of shown to me, but I think there's going to be a lot of really amazing work to come from there, ranging from performance right down to the gut microbiome as well. So really, really exciting.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about how low-carb diets can help improve dementia or reverse it, because, lately, the statistics are that 50% of people develop dementia in the forms of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, etc. So can you talk a little bit about how low-carb diet can help those conditions?
Yeah, so Alzheimer's kind of got termed, I think it was last year, the year before, this kind of type 3 diabetes, this sort of the new sort of buzz that was coming out with it. And basically what they found is the link, again, it's all to do with high blood sugar levels and high insulin levels. And that they're finding that the impact that has in the brain, and particularly the sort of the amyloid plaque deposition that happens with it. So obviously the problems when you have Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, etc. is really linked to high blood sugar level and high insulin levels. So by lowering, obviously, your carbohydrate content through a low carbohydrate diet, that kind of automatically can help with that side. And what studies have found is that people, when they put them on a ketogenic diet, is that their scores, so their cognition scores, have improved. The major thing, obviously, with the sort of dementia and Alzheimer's, etc., is that obviously there's no preventative studies, and I don't really know if there could really be any preventative studies that you would get ethically approved for. But what it seems is that it's this overall advice that, make sure your blood sugar level is as low as it goes for health in terms of what's right for you, and that it's consistently low, that your HbA1c level, because this is the other aspect, is the glycated hemoglobin, which is a measurement predominantly in long-term diabetes management, but it's this glycated hemoglobin and build-up that seems to have the impact with regards to the cognition aspect as well, that comes into play with regards to Alzheimer's, etc. So making sure that you have a blood sugar level that's stable most of the time, which will then also take into account your insulin levels as well. This seems to be what's having the biggest impact. So, and when it comes to the research with regards to sort of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, on the other flip side of it, what a lot of the work is looking at now is things like MCT oil, coconut oil. There's a lot of studies going into looking at things like caprylic acid, which is an MCT, which is showing that, again, that mix with sort of a lower carbohydrate approach can really help individuals who have already developed dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, and it seems to have these improvements in the cognition.
Yeah, I'm sure Dave Asprey's happy about that.
Yeah.
MCT oil.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe he could fund some studies within there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have a question I like to ask all of my guests. What do you think is the most pressing health issue in the world today?
I think I would have to say obesity, and then the umbrella that comes with it. So obviously, the comorbidities that come with obesity, from type 2 diabetes to metabolic syndrome to cancer, cardiovascular disease. Obviously you can obviously develop things like diabetes, obviously insulin resistant, without necessarily being overweight. And again, from traveling around from the major sort of Western countries, I've just been really shocked, I think, actually, to see kind of what it's been like in sort of every country that I've been to. And, we are living in an epidemic that is just set to get worse. And diabetes in itself, I know the figures from the UK that if we don't get even just diabetes under control, by the year 2030 we're going to cripple our NHS, which is our health system. And that's just with diabetes. That's not taking into account, cardiovascular or any other insulin resistance or anything along those sides. So for me, I think that's probably the most pressing, and that probably puts an umbrella around lots of other conditions within there. But it's now obviously said that we have a major problem more with overnutrition than we do with malnutrition now. So it's pretty scary.
Was there anything else you want to add to our low carb conversation?
I don't think so. Just to say that, yeah, I think it's really exciting. I mean, I'm really excited by the science and the research that's coming with it, particularly the therapeutic aspect. The other side I want to say again, and just I try and sort of stress that, is that this isn't just a miracle cure, that if you just kind of do this, that it's going to fix everything, so it's kind of, sort of take that with it, not kind of get too evangelic with it. It might not be right for everyone, and sort of lead by example. If it is right for you, then, other people will follow suit with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about where they can find you and maybe any other projects you have on the horizon?
Yeah, so you can find me at my website, which is just lowcarbgenesis.com. I'm now just starting to take on clients again, actually. So obviously I kind of put a little bit on hold whilst I was traveling across different time zones. So so people can contact me there if they want, help on starting ketogenic or low carb, anything along those lines. I do have a few other projects that are coming up, which hopefully I'll be able to talk about in the next kind of few months. So my social media again is just Lowcarb Genesis, and that's on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. It's so good to finally chat to you again.
Yeah, I know.
So long after the cruise.
I know, we've been meaning to do this for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. You can find me at live110.com. There you can learn about how to heal your health conditions naturally and detoxification, my favorite subject. You can also learn about my healing and detox program, Mineral Power, at mineralpower.com. Thanks again for listening to the Live to 110 podcast. Damien, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Wendy. I really appreciate it.
Well, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your story of, how you healed yourselves, you and your wife, Heather, and your issues with chronic fatigue and other health issues that you guys were having.
Yeah, so back in around 06, 07, we were living in California. We had a tremendous amount of extremely stressful events in a short period of time. We had gotten, recently got married. Wedding was back in New York, New Jersey. So, Heather was planning that overseas across country while she was, working in marketing communications 60, 70 hours a week. Yeah. And then, my father had gotten diagnosed with esophageal cancer. I think, like yours, right?
My father passed away from that as well.
Yeah. So that was a little traumatizing. We had a couple of job losses, and then we relocated, moved, and literally closed in like 20 days and had to move and everything like that. It was just a lot of stuff occurring all at once. In addition to that, we were living in the Sacramento Valley, which is kind of like a pool of pesticides, so there's a lot of agriculture there. Heather was working in the agriculture business doing marketing communications for some of the largest agri companies in the country. And all of a sudden, she just started to not feel well. She started to get really bad allergies, really fatigued, and she was going to doctor after doctor, and everybody was just saying basically, oh, it's nothing, it's allergies, it's in your head, you're imagining this, and so on and so forth. And to the point where she got, she actually couldn't even physically get out of bed. She had to leave her job, and her face literally had ballooned up. She had so much inflammation. She didn't look like anybody in these doctors' offices yet. They're telling her that everything's fine, she's normal, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So Heather's kind of a bulldog, from Jersey. So she doesn't take that as an answer, So she did a lot of research on her own, and we ended up finding a practitioner that helped us to kind of piece things together a little bit. For at least he made sense to us, So we had actually flown her cross country for almost 2 weeks, and she spent 2 weeks in this gentleman's office, which was extremely costly, and this is a time when the economy kind of was tanking, and I had actually lost my job as well, and so we were living on credit too, right? So the American dream, So this doctor made sense. He was a chiropractor, and he ran some tests and determined that she had